Hi friend, welcome to my channel. Here we will discuss the history. Roland Freisler was the notorious Nazi judge who expressed sorrow over not being able to kill more people during the Second World War. As president of the Volksgerichtshof People's Court from 1942 until his death in 1945, Freisler became the face of Nazi judicial terror, known for his violent temper, brutal courtroom behavior, and fanatical devotion to Hitler. He presided over thousands of trials, most of them political show trials where the outcome was already decided. Freisler would often scream at defendants, humiliate them, and mock their beliefs before sentencing them to death, usually by hanging or guillotine. He was particularly infamous for his role in the trials of members of the White Rose resistance group and the conspirators of the July 20th plot against Hitler. In many instances, he went beyond even Nazi legal norms, seeking harsher punishments than prosecutors asked for, and even suggesting legal changes to make it easier to execute dissenters. What makes Freisler especially disturbing is that he wasn't just following orders, he took pleasure in the process. He once lamented that legal technicalities and bureaucratic limitations had prevented him from handing down even more death sentences. This regret was not about justice denied, but about opportunities missed to exterminate perceived enemies of the regime. He died ironically and abruptly on February 3, 1945, during an American bombing raid on Berlin. As he prepared for another trial in the People's Court, a bomb blast caused the ceiling to collapse, killing him instantly. At the time of his death, he was holding the case file of a prisoner he likely intended to sentence to death. His legacy remains one of cruelty, fanaticism, and judicial murder wrapped in the robes of law. Freisler's court was less a place of justice and more a theater of terror. Defendants stood no chance. Their fates were sealed long before they entered the courtroom. He treated trials as performances, often recorded and used as propaganda to instill fear in the German population. With his shrill voice and aggressive tone, he berated the accused, interrupted their statements, and mocked their beliefs, whether they were communists, Christians, Jews, or even conservative military officers who had turned against Hitler. Among his most infamous victims were the students of the White Rose movement Sophie, Scholl, her brother Hans Scholl, and Christoph Probst, arrested for distributing anti-Nazi leaflets. Their trial lasted only a few hours. Freisler personally ensured they were sentenced to death and executed the same day, denying them any meaningful chance to appeal. He scolded Sophie Scholl for her moral conviction, treating her quiet dignity with open contempt. Freisler was also the judge who sentenced many of the July 20th conspirators to death after their failed attempt to assassinate Hitler. High-ranking officers like General Ludwig Beck, Colonel Claus, von Stauffenberg, and others were dragged before him. He subjected them to vicious verbal abuse, stripped them of honor, and sent them to gruesome executions. Some were hanged by piano wire in slow, torturous fashion, filmed for Hitler's private viewing. His courtroom was notorious even among some other Nazis. Joseph Goebbels, while admiring Freisler's zeal, feared his theatricality was over the top and damaging to the regime's image. Even the SS and Gestapo found him extreme, though they made full use of his efficiency in eliminating enemies. Freisler's obsession with death sentences and total loyalty to Hitler made him a symbol of legal tyranny. His legal reforms aimed not to ensure fairness, but to speed up the machinery of repression. He rewrote laws to allow faster executions and removed rights of appeal. Even minor dissent or mere suspicion of defeatism could lead someone into his courtroom, and few ever left it alive. His death during an Allied bombing raid was seen by many as a stroke of poetic justice. He was not brought to trial in Nuremberg like other top Nazis. Instead, his end came as suddenly as many of his victims. Despite his death, the legal infrastructure he helped build continued, killing people until the Nazi collapse in May 1945. Roland Freisler remains one of the most terrifying examples of how law can be twisted into a weapon of mass murder when driven by ideology, hatred, and personal ambition. After Freisler's death, his legacy lived on as a haunting reminder of how a judiciary can be transformed into an instrument of terror. His courtroom was not a place for truth or justice. It was a political weapon, used to reinforce absolute loyalty to Hitler and eliminate any form of dissent. In many ways, Freisler embodied the very soul of the Nazi regime's brutality in civilian life, where the mask of legality concealed outright murder. Even within the Nazi system, he was unique. Most Nazi judges followed the regime out of opportunism or fear, but Freisler relished his role with ideological zeal. He did not merely obey Hitler's orders, he anticipated them. He pushed for harsher laws, more efficient executions, and quicker trials, often boasting of the number of death sentences he handed down. He was reportedly furious when the legal process spared someone he believed deserved to die. That kind of mindset made him particularly dangerous, not just a functionary, but a willing architect of judicial murder. Freisler's background shed some light on his twisted ideology. A trained lawyer and World War I veteran, he was briefly held as a POW in Russia, where he became fluent in Russian and familiar with Marxist ideology. Ironically, this exposure seemed to harden his nationalism rather than soften it. After returning to Germany, he joined the Nazi Party early and quickly rose through the legal ranks. He attended the 1942 Wannsee Conference, which coordinated the final solution, showing that his reach extended into genocidal policy, not just legal repression. In post-war Germany, Freisler's name became synonymous with the perversion of justice. He was never tried at Nuremberg because he died before the war ended, but his methods and court proceedings were studied and condemned. Survivors of his trials, as well as families of those he condemned, spoke of the sheer cruelty he exhibited as a detached bureaucrat, but as a man who seemed to enjoy the power of life and death. Today, Roland Freisler stands as one of the darkest figures in Nazi Germany's internal machine. No reproof that evil doesn't always come from the battlefield or concentration camps. Sometimes it comes in the form of a man in a robe, behind a bench, armed not with a gun, but with a gavel sharpened into a weapon. His story is a chilling reminder of how legal systems, when corrupted by totalitarian ideology, can become far more dangerous than any army.